The best place. There are a whole bunch. I happen to live in an area where there are an awful lot of them. There's a couple of places in Highland Park that are really good. There's Le Bebe over in North Brunswick. That's one of the higher end restaurants with good Middle Eastern food. There are a lot of them. There really are. New Brunswick has a few. The area is just full of really decent and even better than that Middle Eastern food.
Yeah, I grew up at Evelyn's. I remember when there was like a little hole in the wall.
Yep.
Anyway, this is your kinky friends. I'm Nicholas Tanek, and we're going to talk about belly dancing. And we're definitely, I have to talk about it because I'm so curious about it. We're going to talk about the legendary Roxy and Dukes, but we'll get to that. Please welcome Miriam of Anka Kusu. Say hello.
Hi there. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for being here, fellow New Jerseyan.
Yep. Born in North Jersey, settled in Central.
Yeah, I'm Central all the way. I was born in Rahway, the Rahway Hospital. Ended up settling in like New Brunswick area. I grew up in Edison, stuff like that. Okay, belly dancing. You love belly dancing. You started a studio, basically.
I teach classes. I never ran my own studio. I sublet space. But I did teach for like 10 years.
Oh, okay. And how did this all start? So you don't just like come out here and you start belly dancing.
No, I mean, I did all kinds of other dance. Mom took me to ballet and tap and jazz classes as a little kid and that kind of stuff. And dance was kind of always something that just I connected with, all different kinds of dance. I was not petite even as a child. I mean, I'm not super tall, but I was chunky kid, curvy woman, whatever words you want to use for it, from a fairly young age. And so ballet, the traditional route that lots of little girls take, wasn't as open to me as stuff like modern and jazz. And so that's primarily what I studied right into college, actually. And then I got involved with the New York Renaissance Festival. And I was working for a vendor who was across from there. They had a belly dance stage with a couple of dancers throughout the day. And I just absolutely fell in love with what I was seeing. There was something that I connected with in the way the movements are executed and the earthiness of some of the styles. And then I got involved from there in helping to produce a smaller Renaissance festival in New York State called Stockwood. That was like 2002 maybe. And I got to hire all the contract acts for the show, which included a number of belly dancers. And so I got to know them personally. They started giving me like little lessons in the green room and stuff like that. And when I came back from that show, the internet wasn't quite what it is now, but I started looking for a local teacher.
Oh, wow.
I was just absolutely in love with the movement.
Well, the Circle X says, "Hi, Nicholas. I really loved your content. Keep it going." Thank you, Circle X. I appreciate that. And I knew this was coming immediately. Ping Noob, any interest in BDSM?
Not directly. I'm familiar with the world. Little on the harder side to shock me, but.
Okay. So, all right. So I have a love for like Bob Fosse. One of my favorite movies of all time is All That Jazz. And one of the things is the actual producing a show. I'm working on producing a show now, a YKF kind of cabaret thing.
Oh, neat.
Yeah, with the long way off, takes a lot of effort. I don't even know how I'm going to pull it off, or I'm going to need a lot of help. So anyone that's interested out there. Yeah, so what was it like, first of all? Okay, so you got into it, and then you have to produce an act, basically, right?
Well, you're a student for a while, right? Hopefully you have a teacher.
Your first time on stage, was it like an act that was like made for you to play, or was it an act you created yourself?
So I was scheduled to be in a student performance, and there was in Central Jersey a twice a year international belly dance festival that I had been going to sort of just as a visitor for a few years. And a couple of the other students and I had gotten together. We were practicing together, to get ready for the student performance. And on a fluke, they had you had to call in. It was random to get a spot to perform at this international festival. And we decided to try, the group of us who were sort of practicing together. And we got through. And we got a spot in this big international show. And so we had to come up with a troupe name, and we had to come up with stuff to dance, music and stuff to dance to. And we did, I think it was like a 4-minute performance under the troupe name Nebin Femme, which is Romani for crazy women. Because we kind of felt like we were being a little crazy to jump in and do this in such deep water. And then a few weeks later, I had my first student performance.
So what was it like the very first time you got on stage? Because a lot of people, I mean, that's a big thing for people. A lot of the people I know who are performers, they say this as advice. They're like, the hardest thing is the first step.
Yep.
Is to get out there and do it. So you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I was standing in the wings waiting to go on. I remember feeling like, oh my God, I'm out of my mind. Why am I doing this? Why am I here? I should just run away. And then we stepped out on stage and the curtain opened and I was like, and I knew my choreography and I felt home.
Do you ever mess up on stage? I mean, we all.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And it's all on video. You can look on YouTube for it.
Please,
I mean, over the years, I started my own troupe of live Middle Eastern musicians and dancers, and that's Anka Kusu. And we've had some real bloopers over the years. We performed at that international festival year after year. I had one of my dancers blew her ACL on stage with a sword over her head. Yeah, that was kind of dramatic. So, I mean, it's live theater. Stuff happens.
Yeah. Now, I purposely, like, I do this show live. I personally like the energy and who knows what the hell's going to happen live. Like, is that it? Like with me, so to speak. If I do a show like that's in public on stage, or even in this stuff, like I kind of feed off the energy and it kind of gets addictive in a way.
Yeah.
You find that true?
I absolutely understand that feeling. There's something magical about feeling prepared and not knowing what's going to come next at the same time.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm one of those personality types where like diligent about practice and I do my research and like I get prepared, and it's not because I think things are going to go quote unquote perfectly once I get out on stage. But because I feel like the more prepared I am, I have a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, a plan D, a plan E, all kinds of things that might happen. I know how to respond, how to react, how to handle it. Because of the prep work that I've done. And then there's always, a something Z that I never thought of that happens, of course, because live theater.
What was it about belly dancing specifically that you loved as opposed to, I mean, there's other kinds of, and I'm not lumping belly dancing in with burlesque. It can be lumped in. I can see why.
I mean, there are
separately in many ways.
The costuming, there are some similarities in some kinds of costuming. But what appealed to me, a couple of things about belly dance or Middle Eastern dance that appealed to me. The movements are sort of vastly different from what we see in Western dance. So Western dance is often much or mostly about leg movement and arm movement specifically, staying away from like more traditional Latin dances, but like ballet and jazz and tap, it's all about foot placement and leg movement. In Middle Eastern dance or belly dance, it's about body isolation, torso isolations, hip isolations. The movements are sort of organic. They have a roundness to them because that's the way our joints fit together. That just felt natural to me and looked beautiful. And from the first time that I stepped into a more formal classroom, you know, with a mirror in front of me and everything else to learn more belly dance, it looked, what I was seeing in the mirror on my body looked organic. It looked natural and like it belonged there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it felt that way.
Now, with me, like when it comes to you know, burlesque, I don't lump them together, but I see the similarities between kink culture, kink community, and burlesque culture. You know, 'cause it really deals with sexual expression in many ways. You know,
being comfortable with your body, being able to express your thoughts, emotions, desires with your body. Yeah, those things are definitely parallels to really all dance and stuff in the kink world.
now a lot of performances, like for example in burlesque, you know, they tell stories to the songs, so to speak. You know, for example, like "Trust in Me" by Susie and the Banshees, which is originally from the Jungle Book. You know, with the snake, you know, and everything like that. It becomes like this kind of song of seduction. You know what I mean? You know, then the burlesque performer would use that as a song. So, have you used like a storyline within your act when it comes to the belly dancing?
Yeah. So, belly dance is a big umbrella term. There are a lot of kinds of dance that fall under that umbrella. And there are more sort of classic traditional styles, your classic Egyptian, classic Turkish, whether they be modern classics like cabaret style or more folkloric, more traditional sort of old world style. But you also have some, they're really fusion dances, but they fall under the umbrella of belly dance. There's an American style that sort of started on the West Coast in the 70s that took the Middle Eastern traditional movement vocabulary and sort of codified it in the way that like Bob Fosse did for modern dance, right? And those styles of dance, the much more modern, more sort of American or fusion styles of belly dance, use any kind of music, right? You can, if you can find the beat in the music, you can perform to it, sort of thought process. And I've done some fusion stuff. I've done some modern pieces using, you know, rock and roll music, or, you know, I did one to a country song. And some Broadway stuff. And in those pieces, I tend to tell the story from the song through the dance, right? So the lyrics are in English, my audience can hear them and understand them. And so I tend to sort of lean into that as part of my inspiration for the choreography, or if I'm dancing improvisationally for the movements that I choose. When I'm dancing to a song that my audience can understand the lyrics to. When I dance more traditional styles, when I dance with more traditional Middle Eastern music, the odds are fairly slim that I'll be dancing in front of more than a couple of audience members who understand the lyrics. And while I will find the translation of the lyrics so I understand the song I'm dancing to and make a faux pas, like accidentally choose to dance to a song that's like religious, because that would be a big no-no in the Middle Eastern world. And I want to understand what, if there are lyrics, what my song is talking about. I lean much less heavily into telling that same story and more into how does the music make my body feel as far as movement is concerned.
Okay. All right. And what songs, like what, all right. There are certain songs, I put it this way, there's like a soundtrack to my life. You know what I mean? If I'm going to like a party or something like that, there's certain music I put on. If I'm going to write, I have certain music I have certain music on while I write, but there's certain music to like prepare myself to get to that mindset of right, So what is the song that does it for you to prepare yourself to perform? Or
It's
what
usually
song do you
whatever
like that you like
it's
to
usually the
perform?
music I've chosen for that performance that I'm playing over and over again.
What are some
So
like your all-time favorites?
um so there's a Turkish piece, Rompy Rompy, very traditional. It's done in a 9/8 time signature that I love. Miserlou, which is there's a Turkish version, there's a Greek version, um, which is actually sort of has an interesting history. Miserlou is the godfather of surf music.
Oh,
Um, the uh, the surf music that came out of the 60s and the 70s, the original
like the
tracks,
Ventures.
came from a traditional Middle Eastern piece of music called Miserlou. Um, and it has that kind of like rolling wave feel to the sound of it, along with a really cool drum rhythm. Yeah, those are probably some of my top for traditional music. The soundtrack for me, life soundtrack for me is super, super eclectic.
Mine
Um,
too.
yeah, I mean, and mine includes Middle Eastern music from, Turkey and Egypt and Lebanon and modern renditions of stuff and, Persian Gulf music and Khaliji music. I mean, along with, I grew up listening to both Broadway and country Western stuff. My dad was really into that. My dad was sort of a folk musician. Um, and grew up graduated from high school in 85, so 80s rock, along with 60s and 70s stuff as well. I mean, and I love all of that stuff still. So
It reminded me of an album I haven't listened to in a while, but I've absolutely adored. It's by Jah Wobble. I don't know if you ever heard of Jah Wobble. J-H Wobble. He did a lot of work with Public Image Limited. He was the bass player of Public Image Limited. He did some work with Primal Scream, some work with the Orb. Very bass player, very, very spiritual. But he loves dub. He loves dub music, and he intertwines Middle Eastern music, Greek music,
with
especially
dubstep. Mm-hmm.
with dubstep. Not dubstep, dub music. I'm talking about like old dub plates and stuff like that, like in reggae, world. Um, and yeah, this is an album called Rising Above Bedlam, and also another one called I believe it Take Me to God, and like Sinead O'Connor's on it,
Okay.
and it's really amazing. If trust me, and plus there's lyrics. I mean, he's a Brit, so like when he sings or talks or whatever he does, it's a very mixture of styles, but it's heavily influenced by Turkish music, by Middle Eastern music, and Greek music as well. Definitely check it out. Jah Wobble, Jah Wobble. So Roxy and Dukes. Now, before we begin Roxy and Dukes, I have a fascination with Roxy and Dukes. I live near Roxy and Dukes. I don't want to say where, but I do live near Roxy and Dukes. Roxy and Dukes was an actual, I'd say almost legendary club that was a one of a kind club that was in Denell, New
Yeah.
Jersey. Um, they hosted burlesque shows. I remember we offline. You were saying that it was like a place like a sports bar for people who aren't in the sports.
Yeah. So I was
How,
taking multiple dance lessons belly dance lessons at the time with multiple teachers. And one of the teachers that I was studying with had a home studio. And as I was leaving from class one night, this guy gets out of a car in the driveway and comes walking up to the front door. And it's somebody that I recognize from, my last life where I was super involved in the area Renaissance festivals from the Jersey Ren Fair. And it turns out he at the time was living with and married to the dance teacher I was studying with, and that was Jim Parks. And I wound up standing in his driveway catching up. And he was thinking at that point in time about opening a club. And what he said to me was, we really need a place here in Jersey where people who don't want to watch sports can go and have a beer and hang out. And that was sort of the starting concept that he had that became Roxy and Dukes within a couple of years. He was super into the music scene and had some contacts with a number of bands from around the country and started collating, a list of performers that he wanted to have. And the whole idea was, music and performance-based space with some food and booze, like the kinds of places that there were years ago in the Village, but here in Jersey, so we didn't have to spend all that money to get there, and we could just spend the money at the place. And he and his brothers actually, I think, built the stage that was in Roxy and Dukes and redecorated the whole place. I think it was originally like a Lions Club or something, the building.
I can see that.
Yeah. And he had reached out to a friend of mine, actually, who was moving. She was part of a familial line belly dance troupe. She was in a troupe with her sisters. Her mother had been their teacher, but she was out by Pittsburgh. But she was moving to Jersey. She was engaged to a fella that we were all friends with here in Jersey, and she was moving to Jersey. And she and Jim started talking about doing a belly dance show in the lineup. But her concern was that she didn't know the local belly dance community. She was moving here from Pittsburgh. But she had connections from a lifetime involved in the bigger scene, to bring in some sort of bigger name acts from further away, but didn't have a connection in the local scene. And then they reached out to me. And she and I started putting those shows together, and pretty much right away it became a once a month event at Roxy and Dukes.
That's cool. So you were a part of something bigger when it comes to belly dancing at Roxy and Dukes. And so what happened? Like, I know the pandemic hit, and I started, I was living in Denellen at the time. I also had to get a liver transplant. So I'm knocking on death's door, during the height of COVID, and just seeing restaurant and place after place close. And then I heard Roxy and Dukes close. Would you say it was mainly the pandemic that did it? That closed
that was definitely the last nail in the coffin, and it was a big one. So I wasn't involved in the day-to-day operations, and I won't even pretend to have any kind of solid grasp on what's involved in running a venue day-to-day. But for any facility that is super dependent on crowds coming out for performances to pay their own rent and to cover their own costs, when people make decisions to stay home or to only go out once a month or, anything like that, it has impact. And every single event that you throw at or produce at a facility like that is like when you were 6 years old throwing your birthday party and you don't know if anybody's going to come. Night after night, please, please, please let the popular kids show up because they'll bring people with them. Night after night after night, any venue that's dependent on live performances. And so I can't imagine that, and they were only, they were around for less than 10 years. You get a following. You hope the following's big enough to keep people coming regularly, you hope you're making enough money to cover your costs and to put some into advertising. And I know that they were holding on, but I don't know how deep the pockets were, And so COVID was a big hit, like having to shut down completely, and I know that Jim Parks wasn't working elsewhere. Like Roxy and Dukes was his livelihood.
So what was the biggest crowd that you had there as an audience?
So for the show that I ran, the monthly belly dance show, every year our biggest show was our student showcase in June. We sold out at standing room only every year for our student showcase. And I have to say that was always my favorite show.
And what did that involve?
So as an independent belly dance teacher in New Jersey, somebody who didn't have a full-time studio, I became aware that the opportunities for my students to perform were pretty slim, right? When you own a big studio, you produce your own show. When you only have maybe 4 classes worth of students, it's not a whole show all by itself, right? So I had this idea. I was already running the Roxy and Dukes show monthly, and I had this idea to once a year to make the show open to all of the area belly dance instructors to sign their classes up for a performance slot. So, and at the time, we had a ton of sort of independent belly dance instructors who were teaching, 3 or 4 classes, in some case, 1 class a week. And then we had some of the bigger studios that are kind of still around, where maybe they had 6 or 7 classes that were ready to perform. And so we did everything. I broke the show down usually into like 3 acts. And the first act would be brand new beginners, students who had been with the teacher for like a year or so, who had a small vocabulary, and the teacher would put a 3-minute performance together for them, and they'd get their first taste, right? So they've been taking classes regularly now. Let's put them up on stage and see if they love it. And most of the time, right, they do. That feeling of getting up on stage that we talked about before, right? I wanted to give that to the brand new beginners, get them hooked, right? And then the second act would be intermediate students, maybe students who were learning one of the props that we use in belly dance, like veil or cane or sword. And then the third act would be soloists, students who were advanced enough that they were starting to work on solo performances, but still with a primary teacher, not out on their own yet. And so the teacher, and my requirement was that the teacher who signed you up had to be involved in creating your performance in some way, whether it was, you did the choreography and came back and practiced it with her and got, tips or whatever, or whether the teacher built the choreography and you learned it. Either way. And we would have 20, 25 classes participate. They'd get a 3-minute time slot, and it was a crazy night every single time we did it.
Did you have live music or recorded music?
This was all recorded music. You have like middle-aged women who never took a dance class, who started taking belly dance like a year ago with 2 girlfriends. Their husband comes, 2 other girlfriends that they've been raving to it about come, their kids come, right? We filled every chair Jim had, and people paid us to stand in the back and watch. It was an amazing show every year.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So these students, basically, when they signed up, they're like, well, you're going to have to perform. So they're going to have to work, basically.
So it was the teachers who actually signed up for the show. So they'd say, okay, I have 3 classes. One of them are really just like baby beginners, like they just started with me a few weeks ago. I'm not going to sign them up for the show. But my other 2 classes, one is a more advanced beginners class and one is an intermediate class. I'm going to sign them up for the show. And then they go back to their students and they say, hey, on this date at this time, we're going to participate in a performance. I'm going to build the choreography for you. We're going to figure out what we're going to do for costuming together, and who can commit to being there.
Okay. And what, okay, so tell us about the kind of change that happens when someone who doesn't have any experience, probably has stage fright, and goes into this whole world of actually becoming a performer, going into your class or with one of your teachers or you, and like kind of, I guess, blooming or blossoming or what is it?
Yeah. So I was that student in the beginning, and when I was teaching, I would tell all of my, I would
Aren't we
tell
all,
all of my
really?
new students this. When I walked into my first formal belly dance class and the teacher said, at the end of the year, we're going to do a student recital. And I was like, no fucking way. I was like, you are not going to get me up on that stage. I'm like, I'm just here because it's good exercise and I like the way it feels and it's fun. And like, you all get on with your bad self. I'll come sit in the audience and cheer for you. I am not getting on stage. Well, I just told you before, by the end of that year, not only did I get on stage with that class, but I formed a student troupe with some friends and we got on a big stage, right? Like 9 months later. And I was totally hooked from the minute I stepped onto the stage.
Oh, okay. So, all right. So you go in. Now, let me ask you this. There's when it comes to belly dancing, we were talking about this too before. Like some people automatically, and I'm guilty of this. I'm totally guilty of this. When like I was at like corporate parties, and there's families there, and belly dancing comes out. So can be a family friendly thing.
Oh,
But
it totally is. Yeah.
it also is sometimes lumped in with the sexuality aspect of it.
Sure. Well,
So
I mean, so there's a lot of different styles of costuming. And again, belly dance, big umbrella, right? But when you say the word belly dance, especially here in the United States, everybody automatically thinks of the like blingy, sparkly bra and skirt set, right? Belly bare sort of costuming, which brings with it, because there's a certain amount of exposed skin, and here in especially this country, if there's exposed skin, there's some portion of the population who's going to be titillated by it, because we're a little repressed in general. But the minute that the general public thinks about that kind of costuming, right, they start to think along the lines of very sexualized performances, right? And the movements, like I said before, are super organic, like big round hip movements and, belly flutters and, rolled shoulders and stuff, which are all stylized differently, but seen in stuff like burlesque, right? A big hip roll, a big shoulder roll, common to burlesque also, the movement style, because it's got sort of a feminine nuance to it.
yeah, of course.
Right. But there's styles of belly dance and of belly dance costuming that are much more conservative. So it comes up out of the families and folk dance. It was something done in celebration. The women all together in a society where a lot of times celebrations were separated, men and women, right? The women would dance together for each other in just whatever like they were wearing. It wasn't a performance costume. And then in the 20s, we had Hollywood pick it up, and cinema in Egypt as well pick it up. And so costuming became sort of much more stage-oriented, cabaret, and it was very influenced by the cabaret performances of that era, right? Super glittery, long skirts with high slits, right? The ingenue laying on the piano and singing with the, her entire leg exposed or whatever. Super influential on the costuming that now is being seen all over the world on this, on these films. And so the modern costuming that we see tends more towards that, both out of Egypt and Turkey, which are really the two big places that costuming, generalized belly dance costuming comes from.
Yeah. So when it comes to, belly dancing origins, actually, the word belly dance comes from Egypt. And, and so what is it about Egypt and Egyptian culture that you love so much?
So, Egypt is a hard one for me because it's a very modern Egypt. There's a lot of repression of femininity and of women in general. And there are some significant differences between the kind of dance that comes to us from Egypt and the kind of dance that comes to us from Turkey. When I first went into belly dance, I didn't understand any of those nuances. But I picked up on them pretty quickly. I was fortunate to have some really good teachers who understood the history. And so Egyptian styles, we're talking about stage versions,
Yes.
the cabaret versions of these dances. And the Egyptian versions tend to be much more heavily influenced by Western ballet. So they lots of elevation, like your foot is in the releve position or in a high heel where it's your heel is supported by a heel, but where you're sort of lifted up onto the ball of your foot in for a lot of the movements, which changes biomechanics, changes the way the movements are executed a little bit. And the style of dance tends to be more sort of airy and light. In Turkish style stage belly dance, it's done with more of a flat foot without raising the heel. And the knees are a little more soft, a little more bent. The style of dance tends to be a little more earthy. If you're into like pagan and chakra stuff, like more root chakra than sort of head chakra. The energy of it is much more kind of earthy. And not that you don't, I mean, you have dancers, famous dancers in both styles who are more or less sort of sexy in their presentation. But the sort of the general feeling a lot of times is that the Turkish dance is more sort of rooted in feminine desire and feminine mystique, and the Egyptian style is a little more sort of highbrow.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Yeah, so it's actually the Turkish style that I lean towards.
Oh no, okay, that's great. So now let's talk about belly dancing and seduction, basically. Like actually all dance, I think, is in some way, shape, or form, some level, is a form of seduction, right?
I would go further than that, in fact.
Okay,
and
please.
I would say that any human being who has a good sort of connection with their body, and you see that in dancers, and you see that in martial artists, and other people who do performance or active stuff with their bodies, right? Who have that good connection and know how to move their body and understand how their own personal biomechanics work, that is sexy, right? Witnessing that is sexy. And when you put it to music or when you put it in a performance aspect, now it's really easy to make the move from sexy to erotic.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's true. So have you used a lot a lot of people when they kind of embrace sexuality, whether it's through dance, whether it's through femdom, whether it's through kink, whether it's through writing or music or whatever, they become empowered by it. How has this, right? How has belly dancing and performing kind of empowered you?
It gave me back that sort of mind-body connection. Like I had been a dancer and I got my degree in engineering and I was all about like making my career, and I kind of walked away from all the forms of dance that I had been connected to, and had a bad marriage and gained some weight and just wasn't connected to my own body in good ways anymore. And belly dance absolutely was what brought me back to myself. Brought me back to like understanding how to move my body and being comfortable with it. Just being comfortable in my own skin. I mean, I went from the student who was, just gonna take the class and was never gonna, roll my t-shirt up and show my belly, and was never gonna use this, to show off what I could do or who I was in any way. I was just gonna stand in the back row in class, to somebody who ran a community event for close to 10 years and ran a troupe with other dancers for 10 years and taught other women for like 12 years, like, and got up on stage and performed regularly through that, all of that, in some cases wearing, relatively skimpy costuming, the bra and low slung skirt, and feeling comfortable doing it. Like, that's such a gift.
Now, has it affected your personal? If you don't want to answer this, that's fine. I totally respect that. But has it affected your your romantic relationships?
So I kind of had a couple of things happen in my life at around the same time. I was working on the Stockwood Renaissance Fair. I had just started. We weren't even dating. We were just kind of fooling around with this cool guy that I had known sort of off and on. And he and I got a little more serious, and I got introduced to belly dance, and he and I got serious enough. 2 years later, we got married in 2004. And I was by 2005, I was taking multiple belly dance classes. So it all kind of happened at the same time. He was really good for me. I mean, he found me sexy and desirable and let me know in lots of wonderful ways. And at the same time, I was doing something for me that was connecting me in better ways with my own body.
Okay. Now, wait, I want to go back to something you said, because I'm a romantic at heart. I really am. I'm foolishly romantic at heart. I'll admit that. So, what were some ways to how did you phrase it? He reminded
me in all kinds of wonderful ways about how desirable I was.
Can you just, like, for those who want to?
He's in the other room laughing, by the way. He heard me.
Okay, for those who want to put a little extra spark into their relationship, what was the thing that you impressed you the most that he did? If you don't mind, we don't have to talk about this. We don't want to, but
he was interested in our pleasure, right?
Yeah. Oh, that makes a whole difference.
Yeah. And I'd had good sex before. It wasn't that I hadn't had good sex before. But he was all in as far as investment in us both being fully pleasured. And he does sweet romantic stuff too, which doesn't hurt.
Yeah, definitely. No, I know, but I know exactly what you mean. Like, I've always been that way, where, like, my kind of, I guess, satisfaction comes from, pleasing the woman I'm with. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And if something that happens, to me, then afterwards, that's wonderful. So
there's this weird thing that happens when you have two people who are both sort of partner pleasure oriented. Mm-hmm. If you're all about my pleasure and I'm all about your pleasure, we kind of get in each other's way. Or we can get in each other's way, right? I'm so busy making sure that you're having a good time, and you're so busy making sure I'm having a good time. Neither of us, it's possible for neither of us to get there.
It can be a good problem to have, though, I guess.
Right. But if you if you wind up with two people who are invested both in their partner's pleasure and in their own pleasure, sort of equally, I think it works out way better in the long run.
Oh, hell yeah. Without a doubt. I agree on that. Now, have you ever belly danced for him?
I'm going to tell my story.
You do.
So when I first started taking lessons, that first year or so before I got on stage, I wouldn't even practice if he was home. Like, wouldn't even go in the other room, close the door, and practice if he was home. Like, not at all. Mm-hmm. And then he saw me perform on stage, and I still wouldn't practice if he was in the room. He could only I would only let him see the finished product.
I understand that. Of course.
And then he picked up Middle Eastern drumming because I wanted to start working with live music. And I didn't know any live musicians. Like, well enough to work with them regularly. So we found him a teacher, and he started learning Doumbek, Middle Eastern drum. And he jokes. So we went to the belly dance community at the time had, besides the Roxy and Dukes show, had another woman, Anne Marie, who was doing sort of annual picnics, community picnics for the belly dance community, for the students and everybody, just not necessarily to dance, but to come hang out together and just kind of get to know each other, to keep the community connected. And we went to one of these picnics, and he brought his drum, and a couple of other people did too, and they were sitting down and drumming, and a couple of the kids, like the dancers who were there, had brought their families, right? So like the 9-10-year-old kids who knew a little bit of belly dance, maybe had taken a kids class or whatever, started dancing while he was drumming. And so he likes to tell people that he had little girls dancing his drumming before his wife would dance in front of him.
Now let's a question that how do you feel about people who come back and talk about cultural appropriation?
So it's a big subject in the belly dance world. Especially, I had alluded earlier to sort of an American style of belly dance that came out in the 60s and 70s, kind of out of the West Coast. So at the time, you had belly dance developing sort of independently here in this country on the East Coast and the West Coast, because we didn't have the amount of sort of video communication that we do now. And so the cultures were developed a little bit differently. And on the West Coast, there was a woman, Carolina, who sort of codified this Middle Eastern dance movement that she had been learning into the modern sort of Western style dance structure. And at the time, she named her style American Tribal Style Dance. Here we are 30 years later, 40 years later, and lots of people object to that name because it's got nothing to do with Native Americans, which is who we think of as the tribal population in this country. And it makes no reference at all to the cultures that the movements came from. So, right. So within the last probably 7 or 8 years, there's been a huge blow up in the belly dance world about renaming. And then there were some offshoots from her who have, used similar titles for their style, about dancers who, own these styles, renaming them, and giving credit where credit is due. Which is why, like, if you look at my website, I usually refer to it as Middle Eastern dance rather than belly dance, because what I do doesn't just come from Dance Oriental, which is the Egyptian sort of cabaret style that became known in this country as belly dance. What I do comes from Turkish Romani and Gwazi, which is Egyptian, but it's sort of folkloric Egyptian, and Persian Gulf and Khaliji and like all these other places, and Middle Eastern doesn't even really cover it because you have dance styles that come from North Africa, from Morocco and places like that, that are part of this big umbrella also, that are part of this style of dance. And I think it's really important to give credit where credit is due.
Oh, definitely. Now, where do you get your attire?
So high-end dancers who perform professionally, like who are dancing in the high-end restaurants, who in the day were dancing in the Middle Eastern cabarets in places like Manhattan, and who perform on stages in Cairo and other places in the Middle East. Most of their costumes come from designers, and there are designer, like this one loves this designer's name, and this one loves this one, but those designers are primarily out of Egypt and Turkey. Those costumes are, when I tell you expensive, you have no idea. They're all hand beaded. The beads are all glass. Like, they are unbelievable works of art. And they require very special care. So there are less expensive versions of those costumes that are not necessarily mass produced, but more mass produced and are more readily available. You have places like Belly Dance America, which is a brick and mortar in Manhattan, where you can buy sort of stuff from both. You know, it's not a custom designer costume, but you can get some of their sort of, you know, one-offs and some of the more commercially made stuff, as well as the costumes for other styles. So if you see a full cabaret set by a traditional belly dancer, she may do part of her set in that sparkly bra and skirt costume, but she may also do part of her set in like something called the Saidi dress, which is a full cover. It's snug, right? So you can still see the curves on the body, but there's no like open belly, no super high slit necessarily. And she'll do a slightly different style or a very specific style of dance as part of her bigger routine, in that style, wearing that appropriate costume, right? Or a dancer might choose to do a full American cabaret style set, which is all done in sort of that sparkly bra and skirt set. A lot of dancers make their own costumes. I am not an off the rack size. I'm a voluptuous size. I make a lot of my own costuming. It helps that I dance more in sort of the folkloric Turkish style. I don't need as much fancy glittery beading on my costuming because I don't have that level of patience. But I have friends who do. I have friends who hand bead all of their own hip belts and bras and costuming, and bless them for their patience and their skill. I mean, it's a very specific skill.
You know, talking about beating, are you familiar with the Indians in New Orleans? And
Yeah.
like they spend a whole year basically just doing that one costume for that one day. It's
Yep.
it's really amazing. So the same amount of dedication pretty much goes into what you're
Yeah,
doing.
and then so here's the thing: if you're a professional belly dancer, somebody who's earning their living, performing in restaurants, and you know maybe teaching classes also, but you do a photo shoot in a costume, and you can't do a second photo shoot in the same costume,
Yeah.
right? You need a
Yeah.
whole different look for your next photo shoot. So here you've spent thousands of dollars on a costume and you do a photo shoot in it and you get to wear it once in a while to perform in, but you're performing 3 times a week, hopefully, right? In the heyday. So you have to have an awful lot of other costumes in the rotation all at the same time.
Now, what about when it comes to? I got two questions I'm itching to. We're talking about how expensive it is. So, we have a segment called BDSM on a budget. In this case, we're going to do belly dancing on a budget. You know, if some people want to belly dance, some people don't have the luxury of being luxurious when it comes to belly dancing. You know, so what advice would you give to somebody who wants to explore belly dancing but just doesn't have the money to kind of dish out on?
So there is a series of videos called Howcast. And they do stuff on how to everything from like how to change the doorknob lock on your house to how to belly dance. And the belly dance series that they have was filmed like, I don't know, 10 years ago, maybe. But the woman who happened to do it was just getting started as a professional dancer. Her name is Irina. She is an outstanding dancer. You would pay a fortune to take regular classes with her, to take private lessons with her. And you could go watch those how videos on all of the basic movements in her style of belly dance for free and
So,
learn from them.
what makes a good belly dancer?
Connection with both her own body and the music. There's some level of sort of technical ability that definitely has impact. But so there's a broad spectrum when you say belly dancer, right? You have a community belly dancer, somebody who performs in some of the sort of local gatherings and shows and loves it, and they're beautiful to watch. But an Arab club probably wouldn't hire her, right? She doesn't meet their aesthetic. She doesn't know the traditional cultural stuff that they expect somebody they hire to know. Right. So there's this whole range of that when you say belly dancer, right? But I think the foundation for any of them at any level is that connection with the movement, the body, and the music, and how they put them together is what really makes or breaks a dancer I want to watch.
Interesting. Okay. All right. I can see that. Now, in burlesque culture and BDSM culture, there's a huge, I don't want to say following, but it's a huge dynamic of where like a woman puts a man into a female into women's clothes. It's very popular in burlesque. It's extremely popular in femdom, like stuff like that. Do you find does that ever happen in with belly dancing?
So prior to the 1900s, there were white men who had gone to the cultures of origin, to the places of the cultures of origin, who came back with sketches and drawings and stories about having seen men dressed as women dancing. What they didn't understand and what wasn't communicated through those drawings and writings was that they were visiting cultures where you did not put your women on display for other men. That was
Shakespeare. Right. All the women were played by men.
And so they thought that this is what the culture did, but this was what the culture was doing to kind of get around the rules about it and still satisfy this visitor who wanted to see their culture on some level. It was primarily a dance done by women for women, if you go back far enough, and was, like I said, in the early 1900s, 1920s is really when it first came to the stage for public consumption, right? There was one dancer in the 60s who performed in one of the big troupes on the West Coast who started out doing it sort of in drag, for lack of a better phrase, dressed as a woman, who was performing with them dressed as a woman. But fairly quickly, within the first year or so that he was performing with them, they kind of changed it up. His name was John Compton. He was an amazing dancer. And he switched to he was a tall, slender fella, and he just dressed in similar, colors and styles of fabrics and stuff, but definitely like pants and a tunic, so male looking, when he performed with them not long after that. And we have a history, there's a huge history of phenomenal male Middle Eastern dancers who dressed as men and, were not trying to appear as women, but who do those same sort of round and isolated movements and look fantastic doing it. I mean, some of my favorite dancers are men.
Okay, so let me ask you this. This is a fun question. Think of a person. It's two parts, right? A person, dead or alive, famous or legendary or whatever, that you would like to see belly dance themselves, and or a person you would like to dance for.
It's the same person.
Okay, that's good. That's fine.
A woman named Rehan. She's Turkish Romani. She is sort of the mother of Turkish Romani dance. In fact, you can see her on video on YouTube. She's still alive and still dancing and has been for quite a while. The Turkish Romani style is sort of very unique. It's got lots of sort of, besides just kind of the smooth round isolations, it's got lots of sort of starts and stops in the muscular movements, like you see sometimes in breakdance music, a dance, where you isolate the muscle and then you like stop it and start it again. Is sort of what that style is phenomenal at. And I would love to dance for her and to have her correct me.
All right, we're almost over. So rapid fire recommendations. They don't have to be belly dancing. They can be,
Okay.
and they're not the be all end all of to define you. Just something that's, recommend a film.
Film. There's a mid-1980s movie called Lust in the Dust. It's a spaghetti western, and Divine was in it.
Oh, I love Divine.
Yeah. And the first time I saw it was actually with my dad. It's hysterical. It's sort of, my dad is gone. My dad's been gone a long time, but it's one of the, like, it wasn't quite the movie he thought it was when he rented it and put it on, but it wasn't, there's nothing offensive about it. It's absolutely hysterical. Excuse me. But it sort of epitomizes that memory of watching that movie with my dad. Sort of is sort of a significant moment in my memories of my dad, and the movie is connected to that.
This is not John Waters' film, is it? It's just a Divine movie. John Waters, it's like discovered Divine. He did Pink Flamingos.
Yeah, no, I don't think so.
And so, Divine did a lot of their own stuff.
Yeah, this was like 1985, I want to say.
I gotta check that out. There's a great documentary about Divine called I Am Divine. I think it's on Netflix now.
I'll have to look for that.
Yeah, it's definitely.
She totally makes the movie. I mean, she's the biggest persona in the movie.
Totally. Yeah. I was listening to a band called the Vaselines, and they cover a Divine song called "Think You're a Man," and it's a really, really simple song, but it's very campy. Like Divine is. It's very. Check that out. "Think You're a Man" by the Vaselines. It's a Divine song covered. Huh. All right, recommend a book.
Billy Porter's memoir that came out recently. I actually listened to it on audio book, and he reads it himself, so it's not just his voice, but it's his voice in his voice. And it's all about representation, feeling seen in the world, and he's just a phenomenal storyteller.
I gotta get my book on audio. All right, recommend art, any kind of art. It could be sculpture, it could be painting, it could be performance art, it could be artists, it could be someone famous, it could be your next door neighbor.
My husband.
Okay.
He's a graphic artist, a graphic designer. He actually teaches graphic design. And I love his work. I love his work. When, like, late at night when he's like, I fall asleep and the dog's falling asleep like over my foot, and he sketches that, like, those are my favorite pieces in the whole world because he puts so much affection into them.
That truly makes a difference.
Yeah.
Without a doubt, that truly makes a difference. Okay. Recommend a television show.
The original Muppet Show.
Yeah.
Miss Piggy is my icon.
She's awesome. It's funny. I was talking about because I'm a huge music nerd, and I found these old records. I found an old vinyl record of the Muppets, of the Muppet movie soundtrack, and it was since I was like a baby. I've had it, haven't used it, but it got all warped with time and just neglect, stuff like that. So we put it on. And it really sounds like kind of like Satan. So you know, like songs about rainbows. The Rainbow Connection is like so weirdly psychedelic, evil almost sounding, but it's great. It's good for a laugh. All right. All right. Recommend a song.
I can't pick one. I can't.
It doesn't have to be all end all, just something that you like.
All right. If
Like
you've
when
never experienced Middle Eastern music before, look for an original sort of historic version of Miserlou and listen to it.
Okay, I'll definitely check it out. I love checking it out. I was listening to when I was setting up a song by Gauche called Flash, which is kind of like a punk kind of B-52s esque type thing, but it's all about photography, which is cool. Because I interviewed Delilah Nadi from Blackfish yesterday. Got me all
Oh,
thinking
cool.
about photography. Okay, recommend a meal.
Meze with friends.
Ooh.
Middle Eastern meze with friends, with a big group of friends.
For people who don't know, what is meze?
It's the Middle Eastern like version of tapas. It's lots of little dishes that everybody shares. So like hummus and baba ganoush and little pieces of feta cheese, different kinds of feta cheese and olives and good pillowy pita bread, and everybody just kind of takes and shares, and you talk rapid fire at each other while you're doing it. You can't help it.
Yeah, that's what is cool. It's kind of separates, I think, that culture from the Western American culture. Everyone here, everyone gets their own plate, and you order what you order and you eat what you ordered, Whereas a lot of times, like I've had Ethiopian food, and New Brunswick, it was what Makeda's, and even like when we go to, like Evelyn's in New Brunswick or something like that. You get hummus and you get grape leaves and you get falafels and you all share, you all take, and you like,
Yep.
Like that's the way it kind of should be, in a way. Okay.
With good, strong mint tea.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. That's one of the beautiful things about growing up in New Jersey is that, first of all, I like to think of it this way: it's close enough to New York to get into trouble, but it's far enough away to kind of stay out of it. New Jersey gets a bad rap. People come in from Newark Airport and all they see is like factories and smog but like we got some really beautiful places around it. Like
we've got
is awesome. Asbury's awesome. There's right near New Hope and Lambertville and New Hope together. Is really cool. We got some cool things going on.
We have multiple vineyards with rolling green and orchards.
Yeah. Yeah. And the funny thing is that that I personally love, because I'm not racist, I actually love the mixture of cultures, the different cultures there are here. I mean, there's every kind of culture. Food alone is amazing. Like you can't get this variety, in the middle America in certain places, or down south in certain places. Like here, you get like on where I live, I can get within walking distance. I can get good, like I'm talking good, culturally approved, I guess, Indian food, empanadas, Mexican food, Jamaican food, pizza, like you name it, Chinese food, Thai food, sushi, all within a 5-minute radius.
My dad just said, if you walk into the restaurant and people from that culture are sitting there eating, you've probably made a decent choice.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I stand by that. I agree with that totally.
I mean, I was totally raised. My dad was a foodie, so at 8 years old, trying Indian food, and you know
what? No, it opened my. I'm looking back. What opened my mind is me dating women, like from multiple cultures and multiple races and stuff like that. And instead of being like, oh, I steak and potatoes, whatever, but I was so interested in experiencing something new, something different, something that wasn't from my like culture or something like that. I wanted to experience that. So it's like as soon as I walk into an Asian grocery store, was like I was like a kid in a candy store, and then like going to New Brunswick and then having my falafel for the first time when I was very, very young. I was like, this is great, It's like, how come you didn't feed me this? It's great, and that's what blows my mind is that food alone. I don't understand. Like, I mean, racism is stupid anyway, but still, you're missing out. You're missing out on other cultures. You're missing out on other food, other ideas, other ways of life. I think people should embrace it, and I don't know. That's my opinion. Anyway, Miriam, it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you. Please take this time to promote anything and everything you want. I'm talking Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, your studio, any performances, any friends that you want
So
to help promote.
I happen to be super high risk for COVID, and I'm not out there performing or teaching at this point in time. There are a ton of really amazing teachers in the New Jersey area who are either back teaching in person, or so many fantastic teachers pivoted with COVID and moved their classes online and are now moving to sort of a hybrid situation. There's Drum and Dance Center out of the Princeton area. There's Hamsa Studio out of the Cranford area. Debbie in Phillipsburg Dance. Just there are so many amazing belly dance teachers who are even more readily available right now than they were pre-pandemic, because so many have moved their classes online. Find a teacher, take some beginner classes, give it a shot.
Yeah, definitely. And please stay on the line after we're done.
Sure.
After we're done, but everybody, you guys can contact me at yourkinkyfriends.com, or you go to YouTube, which you're watching now. Subscribe. Let's definitely subscribe. We have new content coming to the Patreon. Some stuff that YouTube we can't put on YouTube, which is fun. This is an educational show, though. This is not porn. And we got some big plans coming up. Yeah, yourkinkyfriends.com, Twitter, Nicholas Tanek, Instagram, Your Kinky Friends. Yeah, it's getting late, my friends. My dom is calling me. Remember the cardinal rules, everybody. Be cool, be kind, keep an open mind. Take care.